So I'm here to introduce to you Tyler Moore, who comes from the computer laboratory of the University of Cambridge, works with Ross Anderson. And the title of the talk is The Economics of Information Security, so a very important and interesting topic. And thanks, Tyler, for speaking to us about it.
Thanks, Stefano. Actually, having just heard Stefano's talk, I think it's quite nice. It serves a quite nice motivation for what I'm going to be speaking about, because when he mentioned that, that as security consultants, we push out these predictions for what attackers are going to do in the future, and we may be very good at doing technical work. We can study what a technical vulnerability is, but if we don't understand the underlying motivations and incentives for why the attackers behave in the way that they do, we get it spectacularly wrong. And as it turns out, fairly simple economic analysis can provide a lot of very valuable and correct insight into what's going on in information security. So first, I'm just going to start with an overview of some of the key results in this area of in economics of security, and then I'll go into a couple particular examples. And finally, the last half of the talk, I'll kind of go serve as a case study in some of the research that I've been doing, looking at phishing attacks in particular, and studying the interaction between those who are carrying out the attacks and the different organizations responsible for defending against these attacks. All right, so over the past few years, we've started to apply economic analysis to information security, and it turns out that this works a lot better than technical analysis alone. And you've also got firms which are using security mechanisms to further their own business aims, which is okay, but as long as this is happening, we need to think economically to explain why the security mechanisms are being used in this fashion. And sort of one of the big problems is that we don't have a lot of access to good comparable information. We may have a lot of data, but it's loaded with biases, like Stefano was talking about. And so we need better information to improve the allocation of resources to defending our computer systems. So back in the day, people used to think that the internet was insecure because we just didn't have enough features. We just don't have quite the right technical protocols designed, so we don't have the right authentication mechanisms in place. We need two-factor authentication, no mutual authentication. All these, if we can just get this new technical solution pushed out, all our problems will be solved. So we worked on, we've provided better solutions, AES, PKI, the list goes on. And so, but really, no matter what we do, there are more new, better secure protocols that keep coming out, but no one is claiming that the world is getting any more secure on the internet. So when you take a step back and look at sort of the incentives that are in place, it kind of explains things quite nicely. So the first classic example, my supervisor came up with about 10 years back. He looked at the fraud incidences on ATMs in the UK and compared that to the US. And what he found is that surprisingly in the UK they were suffering much higher levels of fraud than in the US. But he also noticed that in the UK, banks were originally less liable to fraud. The onus was on the consumer to prove that they were not responsible for the fraud. So as a result, they ended up becoming careless, and they ended up spending more money and suffering more fraud. You have these distributed denial of service attacks, where you have malware that gets installed and it's not really concerned about affecting the computer that it uses. It just wants to use that compromised machine as a vector for launching a further attack. And then you have this question: why is Microsoft software insecure, and despite its market dominance? Shouldn't the most secure, best product be the one which wins in the market? But when you think about incentives, These systems are often secure because the people who could fix them don't have the right incentive to do so. It's the bank customers who suffer when you have poorly designed banking systems that make fraud and phishing easier. It's the patients who suffer when the hospital systems administrators put their own interests before the interests of patient privacy. It's casino websites that get hit by the DDoS attacks, not the consumer machines which are compromised and used in the botnet. So this is an example of security being used as an externality, an economic side effect, kind of like environmental pollution. So where you have an interaction that goes on, and the effect is onto a third party. Right. So we're also starting to see information security mechanisms used in new, interesting ways to protect business interests. This has started initially with printer cartridges. Xerox introduced a mechanism to authenticate the printer cartridges to the printer. So they had a business model where they subsidized printers, and so people are happy to buy the cheap printers, but then they get discouraged when they have to go pay 30 euros for a new printer cartridge. So people started to work around it. So what you have here is a system, a security mechanism whose sole design is to support a business model. There's the threat. There's not some nefarious attacker which is wanting to do this. It's someone trying to save a little money. And you're seeing accessory control spread to all sorts of industries. To the auto industry, cars are trying to start authenticating replacement parts, for example. And you have digital rights management, which can influence the outcomes of markets. Apple has grabbed complete control of the music download industry, and until recently, they had their DRM, which meant that you could only use the songs you buy off iTunes onto the Apple encoded DRM standard, but they've since relinquished this only because the other music labels have realized that they're losing out because Apple has completely conquered the market this way. You have Microsoft, which is trying to control the distribution of high definition video content, and digital rights management mechanisms are enabling that. The general thing here is that there's this strong contradiction between the components of a network and the components of a system being distributed further and further out, and devices are becoming smarter and more capable. But the operators which provide these services want to retain control, so they're trying to retain control remotely. Why is it that we have such dominant firms in the software industry? Information industries are structured very different to your standard industry, your standard manufacturing industries. You have very high fixed costs and very low marginal costs, meaning you have to spend a lot of money paying your programmers to write the code in the first place, but once it's written, you can distribute it for virtually nothing. So the cost of each additional copy costs you very little. This leads to very competitive pricing where people try to sell closer and closer to the marginal cost, and the marginal cost in this case is zero. So you also have network effects where the value of a piece of software depends upon the user base. The more people which are using the software makes it more valuable to develop applications for it, for example. And so the company that gets in there first and sells the product for the cheapest gets the market share, and then once they're there, it's very hard to change. So Microsoft's initial philosophy of hurrying and pushing out their software, even when it was insecure, was quite reasonable for them to do this. And if they had waited and held off until they were already had all their ducks in a row and everything was secure, they would have lost out to someone else. They could afford to do that with Vista because they already were entrenched. The next thing you have to do in an information industry is you have to appeal to the vendors of complementary products. So if you're Microsoft, you're providing the operating system, you need to make it as easy as possible for the application developers to add third-party applications. In fact, the lack of security is another example of how Windows made it easier for the third-party vendors to develop software for its system. If you have very onerous and strict security checks on your APIs, then it's going to be harder for your third-party developers to provide the applications which make the software attractive. So let me now talk about sort of what I think one of the biggest problems that can be explained by economics, and that is the existence of asymmetric information, where you have one party has better information than the other party, which can lead to perverse outcomes. So there's this professor at Berkeley called George Akerlof, who won a Nobel Prize for describing this market for lemons, where he used the used car market as a metaphor for a market that has asymmetric information present in it. So basically, you're trying to buy a used car, but the buyers cannot easily determine the quality of the car that they're looking at. So they don't know if it's going to be a cherry, a very nice car, or a lemon, one that's got all sorts of problems. You see two cars, there's no easy way for a consumer to differentiate from one type of car to the next. So the sellers know this, okay? So the buyer is unwilling to pay a premium for the car, and the sellers, in turn, will not. So the market price drops down to the price for a cheaper car, for the poor quality car. And the sellers know this, so they only will be willing to sell their car if it is of poor quality. Because if you have a very nice used car and the market price is too low, you say, well, no, my car is very good and reliable. I'm not going to sell it for that price. So the same asymmetric information exists in the software market. You have security vendors who tout the security of their products. They market the security of their products, but it's often very difficult to ascertain as a consumer of these products whether or not one type of software is more secure than the other. All you have is marketing effectively right now. So buyers aren't going to pay a premium for something which claims to be more secure because in fact it could just be lies. And so the providers, the vendors themselves, will not actually even make secure software because they aren't financially rewarded for doing so. So in the end, you end up getting insecure software because that's what the market decides. So how can we reduce this particular type of information asymmetry? Well, one proposal has been to set up a market for vulnerabilities. So what you could do is you could establish a market price for a previously undisclosed vulnerability. And this provides a couple of features. One, it will provide more information about undisclosed vulnerabilities, but the price of it will inform the consumer as to which product is harder to get a zero-day exploit for. Because if the idea is you raise the price that you offer over time, and then hackers will only get interested once they're starting to get paid more and more money, and they make more and more effort. So once you receive so if you can compare your Microsoft, this version of Microsoft Windows has a market price of this versus this other type of this other software has this price, and you can very easily tell which one is more secure. Vulnerability markets to a certain extent do exist today. There are two companies that you have iDefense and Tipping Point, which are actively purchasing vulnerabilities, not quite in a market form. They don't publish the prices that they pay because it's in their interest not to. Because if everyone knows how much they're paying, then you have a competitive price and you have a competitive bidding process. But if you can instead just continue to pay lower prices, it works in their interest. But this may very well change. There's another company, Wabi Sabi Lobby, which has issued a lot of press releases, but their claim is that they are intending to actually publish an open vulnerability market where they list the prices. And if this were to happen, I think you would get a very clear delineation of the relative